Good morning, everybody. Okay, there we go. Hi, welcome to Musical Mornings with Rock Island Sound and the Westchester Children's Museum. My name is Rachel, and I am a voice, guitar, and piano instructor here at Rock Island Sound. And if you've been keeping up with my streams so far, you've known that we've been talking about the history of popular music. We started out with some singing work. Now we're talking about the history of popular music. And last week, we finished up talking about music in the 1950s and the starts of classic rock. So we left off talking about Elvis and Little Richard. It was a really great conversation. So I'm really excited to have you all with me today because today is actually my favorite day, my favorite stream day, because we get to talk about the Beatles. I could show you, but I have a poster of them up on my wall. Um, the Beatles they are regarded as probably the most influential band of all time. And some people would maybe disagree, but anybody who has studied the history of popular music and recorded music specifically knows that they really changed everything that had been previously known in music. You guys know the Beatles? You've heard about the Beatles before? Probably. um, the they started out in the UK, in England, in a town, in a city called Liverpool. Liverpool. And they officially officially formed the band in 1960. But I want to talk about how they got their beginnings. So, if you know anything about the Beatles, you probably know that the band was comprised of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr. But the band wasn't always like that. That wasn't always the lineup. That Ringo actually joined the band later. So let's talk a little bit about how the Beatles developed. Right. So they all grew up in Liverpool, England. And they were all born around the same time generally. They were all born in the 30s and in the 40s, I mean, and the late 30s and early 40s, rather. They were all about 5 years apart. Ringo was the oldest. John and Paul were around the same age. John was a little older than Paul. And then George Harrison was the youngest. So, the Beatles got their start with John Lennon. When he was 16, he was still being raised by his aunt. His aunt Mimi was raising John Lennon in Liverpool. And he wasn't a super attentive or hardworking student in school. He really liked to write poetry and songs and draw. And he would find himself doing that when he needed to actually be studying or paying attention in class. And that kind of didn't work well for him because he got a lot of bad reports from school, whether that be report cards or just behavioral reports. John was pretty difficult in his young age, but then he found music. So, when he was 16, it was 1957, John Lennon formed a little group with his friends in the high school, and they called themselves the Quarrymen because they all went to school in Quarry Bank. It's cute. So they started out as a skiffle group. Does anyone know what skiffle means? Have you ever heard that before? Well, skiffle is a musical genre with influences from jazz, blues, and folk music. And the thing that made skiffle so identifiable and so different was that it was usually performed with a mixture of homemade or improvised instruments. So finding whatever you had around to create a good sound. So that's what skiffle was. And that is what the Quarrymen, John Lennon's group, started playing. When so John was 16 and they played at a local fair in Liverpool in 1957. And 15-year-old Paul McCartney happened to be there and he saw them play. And that July, he met John, and John was a little skeptical at first. He didn't think that Paul was the right fit at first, but then they quickly became really close friends because John found that Paul actually helped him bring out the songs and the emotions that he had been hiding. So Paul joined as the rhythm guitarist at the time. And then in February of 1958, Paul had an idea. And his idea was to invite his friend George Harrison to watch the band. And George was 14 at the time. So they were all pretty young, right? John was 16, Paul was 15, and then George was 14. And John, originally thought that there was no way that they were going to let George Harrison in. He was way too young, but he persisted for a month and he played an incredible lead and rhythm guitar section, and they enlisted him as their lead guitarist after much persisting and dedication to the role. And it's a really good thing that they did. So they started their own group because the rest of John Lennon's friends who had sort of just been in the band for fun, they left, to start doing their studies at college. So John, Paul, and George were left trying to find a drummer. They really didn't know what to do. They just played rock and roll wherever they could get a gig. And then Lennon's art school friend Stuart Sutcliffe, to be specific, was actually a bass guitarist, and he suggested that they change their name to the Beatles as a tribute to Buddy Holly and the Crickets. And then they decided to let Stewart join the group as a bassist, but they were still looking for a drummer. So as the band started to take off, they got a notice that they could play a residency in Hamburg, Germany. If you don't know what a residency is, it basically just means that they had a solid performance locked down at a one specific bar or theater. So they all said that sounds great. John's aunt Mimi, who had raised him, was really sad to see him go, but they talked on the phone every single week until she passed away. They were really close despite the rocky upbringing. So they went to Hamburg, but they needed a drummer because you can't really have a band with three people who play guitar and one person who plays bass guitar and no drummer, right? That's kind of weird. So they did some auditions and they ended up hiring a guy named Pete Best. So they left with Pete and they went to Hamburg and they stayed there for 3.5 months. And this is when the Beatles really came to be, even though Ringo Starr wasn't a part of it yet. But this was the real first unofficial beginning of the Beatles. So they played at a lot of different weird clubs in Hamburg, and they started out with their residency at the Indra Club. They all the clubs they played at were at the same neighborhood in Hamburg, which I actually visited last summer, and it's called Beatles now. It's a really, really fun area, but back then it was probably the raunchiest, poorest area of Hamburg. So then they actually got in a bit of trouble because they started playing at a rival club, and their original club didn't like that. It was a breach of their contract. So they reported George Harrison, who was still underage at that time, and they wanted to deport him. So they all returned, instead of letting, their band member leave, they all returned to Liverpool, except for Stuart Sutcliffe, the bassist, who stayed. They all left. And this is really the time where they were trying to figure out what they were going to do, um, how they were going to keep up the momentum. And they ended up going back to Hamburg after Stewart left the band. So they were able to go back, and they chose different clubs to work at that were a little bit not rivals of the original one. And so they were getting a lot of popularity in Hamburg. They were getting a lot of popularity back home in Liverpool. And they at one point when they were back home, they encountered a man named Brian Epstein. And he was he was a music entrepreneur. He owned a record store at the time, and he was soon to become the Beatles manager. A lot of people like to call him the fifth Beatle because he was always with them. So he, followed them around for a few months, and then they finally decided, hey, this guy's serious. We're going to appoint him to be our manager. And they did some shows with him where he booked the shows. They got a recording contract in the UK, and they were bargaining for a recording contract, and they auditioned, and the record label Decca Records rejected them, telling Mr. Epstein that guitar groups are on the way out. Little did he know. But 3 months later, world famous producer George Martin signed the Beatles to his label. So George Martin's first recording session with the Beatles was in 1962, and he didn't really like Pete Best's drumming. They suggested they use a session drummer, somebody and a session player, which they have for all the different instruments. A session player is somebody who works at the studio who's ready to help out any band that comes to record. So the Beatles had already been contemplating letting Pete Best go, and they replaced him with Ringo Starr, who left another smaller band to join them. And on September 4th, 1962, they recorded the song Love Me Do, which ended up being their first single and their first huge popular release. So let me play a little bit of that for you. It really was a cultural reset. This song released, and their other first songs released shortly after, songs like Please Please Me and P.S. I Love You. This is when Beatlemania began. And if you know anything about the Beatles, you've probably heard about Beatlemania. And at this point, Paul McCartney and John Lennon had sort of figured out that they were the lead vocals. They would do most of the singing and they would write most of the songs, and George Harrison and Ringo would be supplementary. And supplementary just means that they would help out. They wouldn't be at the forefront of every song all the time, but they would have some of their own. But most of the songs were written and sang by either John Lennon or Paul McCartney. And Beatlemania began in 1963, after their single Please Please Me became huge in the United States. So the years between 1963 and 1966 were insane for the Beatles. They toured all around the world with their songs She Loves You, different songs that became absolutely massive. And songs like I Want to Hold Your Hand. Maybe I can play that one for you as well, a little bit of that. And they enjoyed this at the beginning, but it's slowly and quickly, it's set in slowly, but it kind of quickly started to wear them out. Tell you something I hope you understand. But say that something. I wanna hold your hand. I wanna hold your hand. Right, so from 1963 to 1966, the Beatles were massive. They were playing all over the United States. They were on talk shows. They were the most famous group in the world, and people would chase them. It was really, Beatlemania was not an exaggeration. It was mania. Um, and it was fun at first living this rock star life, but they quickly started to realize that these performances in these huge stadiums were not ideal. They could never hear themselves playing because everybody in the stadium was screaming the whole time. And it was wearing them out. They weren't able to record as much music as they wanted to. And, throughout this time, they did a lot of great things. They met Bob Dylan, they worked with Bob Dylan, they took their stance on civil rights. They kind of changed everybody's thoughts on them, which were that they were just teeny boppers, they were just music for teens. Um, but they kept recording, they kept making new music, and they released a ton of albums over those 3 years. The album A Hard Day's Night, Help, and more, the smaller projects that they worked on. But they decided, after a lot of thinking, that they couldn't keep doing the tour. They couldn't keep touring. It was too much for them. And like I said, they were never able to hear themselves play. So in 1966, they started to stop. They made the decision to stop going on tours. And this is when their studio years started. And this is why a lot of people call them the most influential band of all time, because they were the first band to do this, to say, we're actually successful enough where we don't need to go on tours anymore and we can just focus on recording music. And they embraced an increasingly experimental approach as they started recording their albums after 1966. And they did not hold back. They took every different recording style they could think of, changing where they put the microphones, changing how they recorded certain pieces of the orchestra, taping different pieces of microphone to different areas of the room. It was not normal. And then they released Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band, which originally was not met with a great response in 1966. But now it's renowned as one of the most influential things of all time. One of the albums that everybody knows about. If you haven't listened to the album Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band, I really recommend it. It shows that their style from the songs we just listened to changed so much. They didn't want to be who they were anymore. They still loved those years, but they wanted to become an experimental, almost trippy group that recorded in the studio and created these songs that couldn't be replicated live. That was their idea. They wanted to create songs that couldn't be performed live because of how much effects and how much production and manipulation of different sounds went into it. And once they dropped Sgt. Pepper's, the press widely publicized them as the leaders of youth culture, basically being the leaders of the younger generation, counterculture, lifestyle revolutionaries. Um, and they got a lot of criticism. They got a lot of criticism throughout their whole career because people didn't really, a lot of people didn't understand, particularly people who were interested in older music, older people who were stuck in their ways at that time and didn't really understand how influential this group was going to become. They kept working in the studio, releasing albums like Magical Mystery Tour and Yellow Submarine, and they didn't do huge tours anymore. They didn't want to do that. Um, they started becoming very, very passionate about, more passionate about civil rights and different things in various countries. They really wanted to go places without touring and really just learn more about different cultures. Particularly, George Harrison really, really enjoyed going to India and learning a lot from the other yogis he met there. Um, they released the White Album, they released Abbey Road and Let It Be, and Let It Be was their final album release before the band broke up in 1970. So they were technically together for 10 years, but more like 8 years with Ringo Starr included. The Beatles, I could talk about this for hours. There was so much more that influenced other artists to come, but we have limited amount of time, so I can't really go into too much detail. But like I've said, their decision to make the shift from live performance to working on the studio and then what they created in the studio was unheard of before, and it really changed the game for artists who thought that their only way to live was to constantly be touring. But the Beatles showed that you could create some really funky and interesting stuff if you spent enough time in the studio changing and manipulating the way that you would normally record. They did a bunch of movies in their career. It was a really, every single year that they were together, it was packed with content and different things that they would do. And I'm not going to get into what happened afterwards because it was pretty upsetting when they broke up and when things started to go sour. But they all had amazing solo careers as well. They really focused on the things that were important to them, and for that, I really admire them all individually, but as a group, they just changed the music industry. They said, we're not going to listen to any of these criticisms. We're not going to let you stop us. And they came into the United States full force with their mop top haircuts, despite the fact that so many people would make fun of them, despite the fact that they were at the beginning known as just a boy band that girls were obsessed with. Little, that girls would chase them around when their planes would land. They're much more than that, and they showed that pretty quickly. So I really recommend listening to Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club Band if you want to get a taste of their first studio recording years and how they really wanted to be experimental and change the different ways that they recorded. And if it's interesting to you guys, I could go into so much detail about how they recorded certain songs, how they had so many different sessions with different session players, how they set up microphones, how they changed everything, how they used different tracks, how George Martin used this setup, this console for the first time. There's a lot there, but I hope that you enjoyed this. I hope this was interesting. The Beatles are my absolute favorite band, and I could talk about them for hours. I feel like I barely even scraped the surface, but we're gonna have to move on Friday and keep going to the next decade. But yeah, the Beatles are the most influential band of all time. They're amazing, and I highly recommend that you take a listen. So, anyways, my name is Rachel. Um, I would love if you signed up for some lessons with me or some of my virtual summer camps, which you can find out more about on rockislandsound.com. I will be here on Friday continuing our music history conversation we'll be talking more about the late 60s and 70s. And make sure you tune in to see Noah, who will teach you about the trumpet and drums tomorrow right here at 9:30. So I hope you all have a wonderful Tuesday, and I will see you on Friday. Bye, everyone. Take care.